Lesson 7. Finances and the economics of everyday life. Caring for a person with schizophrenia is not only about emotional support, responding to symptoms, and overseeing treatment. It is also, and sometimes above all, a daily struggle for financial stability, which in this illness is especially fragile. Schizophrenia affects many areas of life, but few of them destabilize a family as quickly and as painfully as money. Impaired risk assessment, impulsive spending, inability to plan, compulsive donations, gullibility towards strangers, bad decisions made in fear or under the influence of delusions, all this means that the person who is ill not only cannot manage money, but often takes actions that may endanger the economic safety of the entire family. The caregiver very quickly discovers a painful truth: without active, conscious, and well-organized financial management, schizophrenia can lead to serious losses in a short time. This is not due to bad intentions on the part of the person who is ill, but to the biology of the illness, to impaired executive functions, memory problems, difficulties in assessing consequences, and vulnerability to manipulation. That is why the caregiver becomes the foundation of economic safety and is often the only person able to make sober decisions. This lesson is meant to help you understand the economic side of schizophrenia. Its aim is not to present theory, but to provide specific, practical tools: how to build a budget, how to prevent impulsive spending, how to protect the person who is ill from manipulation, which control mechanisms are ethical and effective, in what way the person with schizophrenia can safely earn some extra money, and where to seek financial help when the situation exceeds your capacity. We will also discuss what to do in cases of debt, irresponsible loans, problems with banks, or abuse by outsiders. Finances are not a side topic. In the world of schizophrenia, they are one of the pillars of safety, just as important as pharmacological treatment or emotional support. Economic stability not only protects the person who is ill from the consequences of their own illness, but also allows the caregiver to survive the difficult years without additional stress that could lead to burnout. This lesson is designed to prepare you for this responsible role, to show you what the financial reality of schizophrenia looks like and how to build, step by step, a system that will protect both of you. Typical financial difficulties in people living with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia significantly impairs the ability to make rational financial decisions. A caregiver who suddenly finds themselves pulled into the chaotic and unpredictable economy of the person who is ill is often surprised by the scale of the problem. The person with schizophrenia may behave perfectly reasonably one moment and in the next make financial decisions that are completely incomprehensible to a healthy observer. One of the most common difficulties is impulsive spending. Driven by a passing emotion, the person may decide to buy something they absolutely do not need: expensive equipment, gifts for strangers, dozens of useless knickknacks, or costly subscriptions. This behavior stems from a weakened ability to foresee consequences. The person with schizophrenia thinks intensely in terms of here and now, and future outcomes do not automatically trigger in them the kind of concern they would in a healthy person. A second typical problem is gullibility and a high susceptibility to financial manipulation. The person may believe a stranger who says they need help, are raising money for treatment, that failure will cost someone their life, or that an investment is safe and will bring quick profit. In schizophrenia, there is often a distorted sense of responsibility and a compulsion to help, especially when delusions touch on morality, religion, or catastrophic visions. That is why people who are ill may give away their money to individuals who simply prey on their compassion or naivety. Another serious problem is taking out loans, often short-term and very expensive, with high interest rates. The person may do this impulsively, to help someone, to buy something important, to save the world, or simply because an advertisement promises easy access with no formalities. In psychotic episodes, magical thinking may appear, a belief that the money will somehow pay itself back, or that this is a mission that will certainly bring good. Loans taken out in such moments can drag families into debt, collections, and very difficult legal situations. In schizophrenia, short-term memory problems and difficulties with arithmetic are also common, so the person may not remember how much they have spent, may not understand the value of banknotes, or may not have a sense of prices. Even someone who previously coped very well with finances may suddenly lose these skills. Another frequent phenomenon is compulsive donating. The person may feel that they must save others, help those who suffer more, support a foundation, rescue animals, or send money to someone they met online. These behaviors often stem from increased guilt, anxiety, or religious compulsion. The illness introduces into thinking elements that a healthy person would quickly rationalize. We must also mention inconsistency. The person who is ill may one day declare strict control over finances, and the next day completely abandon those arrangements. For the caregiver, this can be a major source of frustration. Understanding all these mechanisms is the key to effective financial care. The person is not acting against you, they are acting in line with what their current state of health is suggesting to them. That is why it is so important, in the next sections of this lesson, to learn how to create a safe financial system that will protect the person living with schizophrenia from their own illness and protect you from the consequences of its unpredictability. How to run a safe household budget with a person who is ill. A household budget in a family where one person lives with schizophrenia must be simpler, more predictable, and much better secured than in an average household. This is not a sign of mistrust, but a form of care, as natural as overseeing medication or everyday functioning. The person with schizophrenia is not to blame for their impulsivity or difficulty with financial judgment. These are direct consequences of the illness and of fluctuating cognitive functions. That is why the caregiver becomes the guardian of economic stability, and the household budget must be adapted to the realities of life with this particular illness. The foundation of financial safety is simplifying everything that can be simplified. The less complex the system of income and expenses, the easier it is to control, and the less room there is for bad decisions. In practice, this means that bills, fixed payments, and essential shopping should be planned by the caregiver, ideally in weekly or monthly cycles. This works much better than spontaneous decisions. Calm, repetitive patterns are predictable for the person who is ill and give them a sense of security. In many homes, a simple, hand-kept notebook or calendar turns out to be helpful, where the caregiver writes down all fixed expenses and their due dates. The person with schizophrenia can take part in this process if it is beneficial for them. If not, this record-keeping can rest entirely on the caregiver. It is a good idea to separate necessary expenses, such as food, medications, and utilities, from discretionary expenses, which tend to cause the most problems. This division is not meant as a restriction, but introduces order and makes it easier to talk things through when an impulsive urge to buy something unnecessary appears. One of the most effective tools is setting fixed financial limits. The person with schizophrenia should have access to a limited and safe weekly or monthly amount for personal needs, small purchases, pleasures, or spontaneous decisions. This way they can maintain a sense of autonomy while not putting themselves or the family at risk. Regular access to a modest amount of money gives the person freedom, yet does not allow the illness to take control of the entire household budget. It is also worth ensuring that access to the main family account is restricted. This can be done by setting up two accounts, a primary one, managed by the caregiver, and a secondary one for the person who is ill, funded only with small transfers. This is a common practice recommended by occupational therapists, social workers, and psychiatrists. It protects the family's finances while not stripping the person of their sense of agency or dignity. A household budget in the context of schizophrenia also requires patience and understanding. It will not always be possible to avoid mistakes. The person may sometimes spend impulsively, forget agreements, or be manipulated by someone from outside. In such situations, it is not worth falling into anger or blame. Every financial mistake can become a starting point for a calm conversation, an analysis, and the introduction of new safeguards that will reduce the risk of repetition in the future. Most important is that the caregiver should not be left alone with all this. If money management starts to become overwhelming, if debts or unclear obligations appear, it is worth seeking help from a social worker, financial counselor, family therapist, or attorney. The economy of a household affected by schizophrenia is complex and requires the cooperation of more than one person. How to recognize that the person is being manipulated? One of the most painful and at the same time most often overlooked dangers in the lives of people with schizophrenia is financial manipulation by third parties. A person in remission may appear fully capable and rational, yet still be extremely vulnerable to outside influence. It is precisely this weakness in assessing others' intentions that makes them an easy target for unscrupulous people, acquaintances, casual contacts, neighbors, salespeople, and also scammers operating online. In practice, this is one of the main causes of serious financial losses. Manipulation rarely looks like an order. It usually appears in a soft, subtle form, beginning with compliments, friendliness, or seemingly innocent conversations. The person with schizophrenia may feel special, listened to, needed, and it is exactly in that state that they become more susceptible to influence. The manipulator exploits the natural, illness-related suggestibility, gullibility, and need to do good, often posing as someone in need. The person with schizophrenia hears stories about illness, poverty, family tragedies, new opportunities to make money, or an urgent mission that only they can fulfill. For a healthy person, many of these narratives are obviously fraudulent. For someone with schizophrenia, they are emotional truths that are very hard to reject. One warning sign is a sudden, unjustified change in the person's behavior. They become more secretive, start hiding their phone, lose money faster than usual, or avoid talking about how they are spending. A new relationship may also appear, intense, full of warmth and trust, but strangely lacking the shared history that normally builds closeness. Often the manipulator works very quickly, they make frequent contact, build a sense of unique connection, and in a short time begin to ask for small helpful amounts that gradually grow larger. It is also worth paying attention to the nature of the money being given away. If the caregiver notices that money is disappearing from the home with no clear purpose, or that the person suddenly starts paying bills that do not belong to the household, financing purchases for third parties, or making transfers to unknown accounts, this is a red flag. In schizophrenia, compulsive helping is common. Manipulators know how to exploit this mercilessly, pretending to be those in need, spiritual guides, friends from the internet, or supposed investors. Manipulation can also take the form of threats. The person receives messages that something will happen, someone will die, or they will get into trouble if they do not pay. In states of anxiety, such messages may be taken very literally, and the caregiver often finds out what happened only when the money is long gone. The most important thing is not to react with anger when you discover that the person has been exploited. It is not their fault. Pointing out mistakes only deepens their fear and isolation and, as a result, opens the door even wider to manipulators. The best response is a calm conversation, gathering all the facts, and jointly thinking about how to prevent such situations in the future through financial blocks, education, greater oversight, or legal action. When the caregiver sees that someone is persistently contacting the person with schizophrenia, exerting financial pressure, or trying to take over control of their decisions, it is worth considering reporting the matter to the police and consulting a social worker or attorney. Financial manipulation of people with mental illness is not a private problem, it is a crime and should be treated as such. Earning extra money and work adapted to the person's abilities. Many caregivers are afraid of the topic of work in relation to a person living with schizophrenia, and with good reason. Work in the classic sense, with fixed hours, demands, pressure, and constant contact with people, is often beyond the capacity of the person who is ill, especially if they experience negative symptoms, lack of energy, difficulty concentrating, psychomotor slowing, or social anxiety. At the same time, complete inactivity is also harmful. A person who, for months or years, does not engage in any meaningful activity gradually loses their sense of worth, agency, and purpose. That is why one of the most important tasks for the caregiver is to find a form of work that is safe, adapted to the person's abilities, and at the same time gives them a sense that they can create something and contribute to the world. Paid work in schizophrenia will not look like a traditional full-time job. Small manual tasks, short assignments, repetitive activities, and artistic projects work very well here. They have a low stress threshold, can be done at one's own pace, and their outcome is tangible. The person can see that they have made something with their own hands. These kinds of activities are recommended by occupational therapists and often form the basis of psychological rehabilitation. The most popular and most effective way of earning some extra money turns out to be handicrafts. People who are ill make jewelry, bookmarks, Christmas ornaments, macrame, simple cord products, figures from modeling clay, candles, soaps, or simple household accessories. These are things that can be done in short stretches, 15 minutes a day, half an hour, as much as strength and mood allow. There is no time pressure and no strict quality requirements. Finished items can be sold online on platforms such as Etsy, Allegro, Vint, eBay, as well as at local fairs and markets. The income from such activities is usually modest, but it still supports both the household budget and the therapeutic process. In addition to handicrafts, graphic and photographic work also works very well. Many people with schizophrenia have a natural artistic sensitivity that can be turned into practical activity. Photos of nature, simple compositions, or urban landscapes can be sold on stock photo sites. Mandalas, simple illustrations, graphic backgrounds, and even hand-drawn sketches can be offered as digital files. All that is needed is a mobile phone with a camera or a simple graphic program. Some people with schizophrenia feel comfortable doing gardening work. Watering plants, repotting, small jobs on an allotment or in a garden, or caring for pot plants are activities that regulate the nervous system, teach rhythm, and build a sense of agency. They can be done for friends, neighbors, or the local community in exchange for modest payment. If the person who is ill has the willingness and energy, it is worth setting up together a small online shop or a social media profile where they can present their creations. The caregiver can help with photographing, packing, and shipping, so that the person with schizophrenia does not have to face the difficult world of customers, complaints, or logistics. This provides emotional safety while preserving the joy of creating. People in remission can sometimes work on a par with those who are healthy, although this is not a universal rule. Many take on simple jobs such as security guard, kitchen assistant, or cleaner. These are among the lowest paid positions, but also among the least demanding. Some countries subsidize the employment of people with disabilities in private companies. Their working conditions are adapted to the person's abilities, both physically and through an appropriate work atmosphere. It is worth looking around your area with this in mind. Enormous help in finding work can come from local job centers, non-governmental organizations that support people with disabilities, and employment agencies. In remission, work becomes one of the most important elements of stability, both psychologically and in everyday life. In many countries, especially where public health care is minimal or non-existent, the person who is ill has to finance psychiatric appointments and medications on their own, and these often make up a significant part of the household budget. Under such conditions, there is no room for long-term inactivity. The family, no matter how loving, cannot support an adult indefinitely when their treatment requires regular and often costly spending. In many parts of the global South, it is not uncommon for families, because of extreme poverty and a total lack of state support, to abandon their ill relatives outside churches or at markets, hoping they will survive through begging and the occasional kindness of others. This practice is deeply painful, but born of desperation. To prevent such situations, the person with schizophrenia should be encouraged to work as soon as the acute symptoms subside. Work is not merely for occupational therapy, it is a condition of survival, a pillar of dignity, and a means of making continued treatment possible. The caregiver should gently but firmly guide the person towards some form of income-generating activity, however small, because in the real world it is work that marks the boundary between safety and tragedy. Places and institutions offering financial assistance. Caring for a person living with schizophrenia very often means having to limit one's own professional work, and sometimes even give it up altogether. Family income decreases, costs rise, both medical and everyday. Many caregivers live for years under enormous financial strain, often without knowing that there are many forms of public, social, and organizational support within their reach. This section is designed to guide you step by step through the most important places you can turn to for help. Many families who were ashamed to ask for support regain stability precisely thanks to the courage to claim what they are legally and morally entitled to. The first and primary source of support is local social services, which in most countries serve as the first point of contact. Social workers assess the family situation, help fill out forms, explain what benefits you are entitled to, and are often able to offer real financial support. This may take the form of regular or temporary benefits, housing supplements, subsidies for energy, food, or transport. In many systems there are also forms of support dedicated solely to caregivers of people with chronic illnesses, such as carers' allowances that compensate for lost income. A social worker is not synonymous with social pathology, as many people still imagine. They are a highly qualified professional, familiar not only with the problems of people with disabilities, but also with local realities, NGOs, sheltered workshops, social insurance offices, etc., administrative processes, how to complete applications, and able to provide real financial assistance. It is worth contacting them at an early stage. A second, extremely important pillar of support is non-governmental organizations working in the field of mental health. Foundations and associations run aid programs, offer free legal advice, teach budgeting skills, distribute food and hygiene products, and sometimes provide small, non-repayable grants. In many places, there are also local support groups for caregivers, spaces where you can talk to people who truly understand what you are going through. Organizations such as Mind, Rethink Mental Illness, NOMI, or Carers UK in English-speaking countries, as well as numerous foundations in Poland and across Europe, offer real, everyday support for caregivers. Another element is healthcare institutions, which often have their own support programs for psychiatric patients and their families. Some psychiatric clinics employ psychologists who help introduce the person with schizophrenia to occupational therapy or support the family in planning expenses and limiting treatment costs. In many places, it is possible to obtain referrals for free or subsidized treatment, reimbursed medications, and even psychological help for the caregiver, because the caregiver also has the right to feelings, exhaustion, and burnout. The psychiatrist can issue the certificates needed for various benefits, so it is worth maintaining regular contact. The caregiver should also not hesitate to draw on support from family and friends. In many cultures, asking for financial help is seen as a sign of weakness, but in the context of chronic illness it is simply an act of common sense. In many cases, the caregiver's resources are clearly not enough to provide adequate support for the person who is ill. Family assistance is then essential. Sometimes the relief may be as simple as someone paying the internet bill, contributing towards food, helping to buy medications, or taking over some daily duties so that you can take on even a few hours of paid work. Those who love you often want to help, they just do not know how, until you tell them. It is also important to remember the existence of state programs for people with disabilities which, in many systems, include psychotic disorders. A disability certificate gives access to a range of benefits, reduced fares on public transport, subsidies for energy bills, higher social benefits, tax relief, and the possibility of taking part in vocational activation programs. Obtaining such a certificate can be tedious, but a social worker or psychiatrist can help with this. The caregiver should know one more thing: the system of social care and mental health services is complex, but it is not your enemy. It exists precisely so that you do not have to carry everything alone. The hardest part is taking the first step, but once you do, you often discover that support which seemed out of reach was there for you all along. Summary: managing finances in the context of schizophrenia is a demanding task that calls for patience, sensitivity, and great responsibility. Whether you live in a country with a strong welfare system or, as in many regions of the world, in a place where the person who is ill is almost entirely dependent on their own resources and on family support, one thing remains the same: finances determine safety, the continuation of treatment, and the person's ability to live with dignity. That is why the caregiver must pay as much attention to them as to psychotic symptoms. It is economic stability that allows the person with schizophrenia to maintain continuity of therapy, guarantees access to medications and psychiatric consultations, and protects against extreme situations in which families, because of their own poverty, are no longer able to support their loved one. Responsible money management is not an act of control, but a foundation of care. Protection against manipulation, prevention of impulsive decisions, overseeing the household budget, and finally encouraging the person in remission to work, all these actions create a safety net that prevents schizophrenia from turning into an economic catastrophe. For the caregiver, this means difficult decisions, constant vigilance, and a readiness to have conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable. Yet it is precisely thanks to these efforts that the person who is ill can lead a life that is as stable as possible, and the family is not crushed by a financial burden beyond its strength. Finances are not a side topic in caregiving, they are one of the most important pillars of recovery and dignity. Managed well, they can become a tool for restoring balance, a sense of worth, and independence.